Droughts and pollution have made drinking water a scarce resource around the world. Less than 3% of the world's water is fresh water, and less than 1% of that is available for human use. We have so much rain in Ireland and so many rivers and lakes. We take water for granted, but it's actually our most precious resource. Many of Ireland's rivers and lakes have been polluted over the last 70 years, and most are still not as clean as they should be. Not so long ago, Ireland's rivers, lakes and streams were so pristine. They were bursting with salmon and trout, and we could drink from them almost anywhere. We've all heard the stories of our grandparents as children, swimming and fishing in rivers and lakes, without worry of pollution. Now we've lost that freedom across a lot of the country, and we haven't yet managed to eliminate big problems like fish kills or industrial effluent and sewage waste being pumped out into rivers.
But what if we could restore waters to be really healthy again? What would it take? Is it even possible? Along one river in Ireland, communities have come together to do just that.
Since prehistoric times, Ireland has been abundant with salmon. So abundant that our ancestors, throughout millennia, caught salmon in their thousands in rivers all over Ireland. Today, however, there's nothing near those numbers left. The story of the decline in Ireland's salmon tells the story of how we've been polluting our freshwater environment for decades. About half of Ireland's rivers and lakes are not yet healthy enough to meet the standard of good water quality. But is it a manageable task to restore healthy catchments, to see rivers bursting with fish again? I'm here on the River Blackwater in County Cork, where community groups, farmers, fishermen and local businesses are working together to clean up and restore the river catchment. But are they succeeding?
That's one way to see the river anyway.
The Munster Blackwater has a catchment of more than 3,000 square kilometres, encompassing Kerry, Cork, Limerick, Tipperary and Waterford. Hundreds of thousands of people are reliant on this river. And in unusual ways too.
This is Blackwater Castle, an outdoor activities centre. The setting is spectacular. But if the river wasn't clean and healthy, this place probably wouldn't survive.
Around 7,000 thrill seekers come to this adventure centre each year. Brian McCarthy and his brother set up the centre in 2010, and they're really making the most of what the river has to offer.
But a huge number of people come through this centre.
Most of our groups are predominantly very large, groups in excess of 100 on any one day. And most of our activities revolve around the natural environment, the river, the valley, the trees.
And you employ quite a lot of people in the centre here.
I suppose at the peak, when we've full capacity, we've probably 18 people working.
That is brilliant, and that's all based around the river.
Everything's based around the river and the river valley here. We utilise the natural resources here for all our activities.
Are there wider spin-offs to the activities of the centre within the area?
Certainly. The local economy has probably benefited significantly from our involvement here on the estate. So the amount of people that have actually come here, they would stop in the shops, the bars, the restaurants. So there is a spill-off to the local economy.
There's a huge economic spin-off and benefit to having a clean, healthy, natural environment in the river here for all your activities?
If we didn't have the river, we wouldn't have the activity centre.
This part of the Blackwater is especially scenic, and people come here from all over the world for first-class fishing. This is the Blackwater Lodge, which specialises in guided fishing. Ian Powell, who runs the lodge, has fished this river for over 30 years. He knows it like the back of his hand.
This is a very nice part of the river here. Down below the island there, to me, is heaven.
Really?
Heaven in 100 yards of river. That would be my favourite piece if I had to pick one.
And tell me, what exactly is a gilly?
The original description of it was a fishing servant, but it's actually somebody that takes people out, guides them on the river, like a golf pro, I suppose. So would you like to try it? Good pull with the left hand, and when you stop the rod at 45 degrees, out goes the fingers. Bang. Not bad. First one to hook a fish buys the drink.
Okay, fantastic. You get a lot of anglers through this area, don't you?
Yes, I mean, we would be one of the biggest in the country, actually, as far as salmon fishing is concerned. The Blackwater actually has 20% of the spawning capacity for salmon of the entire country.
So it's a
not the biggest river.
really important fishery. And how important is angling tourism to the economy of this area?
Well, I think it's extremely important. I mean, there's very little in the way of industry, really, throughout the Blackwater Valley. And it's one of the best salmon rivers in the country, without a shadow of a doubt. The spend of somebody coming to go salmon fishing is very considerable. We were talking of anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 euros as the value of one single salmon. And the whole thing feeds out into the local economy, that when you have a lot of people coming in and coming fishing, you have then people that have self-catering houses that let them out, you have the pubs, you have the restaurants, you have the food shops, you have everything else. So, I mean, that all diffuses out into the local economy as a direct result of those people coming in. We'll make a fisherwoman out of you yet.
This is the first time I've experienced the meditative magic of angling. Now I can really understand why so many people spend so much time and money to fish a beautiful stretch of river like this. Salmon have an incredibly complex life cycle between the river and the sea. They require very clean waters and a healthy river ecosystem to thrive and reproduce. We know that climate change is having a huge impact on their survival out at sea, and to give them any chance of adapting, we need to restore rivers to the healthy ecosystems that they once were. The Blackwater River is a designated special area of conservation. Further downstream, I'm meeting Cyril Sake, whose job it is to monitor and protect the quality of the habitat.
What kind of special habitats and species are here? Why is it protected? Why does it need to be protected?
Yeah, we do ongoing surveys on certain species, key species, like the otter, for instance. It's at the top of the food chain. It's a good indicator species, so that tells us, generally speaking, that the quality of the river is either up or down, depending on whether we find signs or the presence of otters. Some of the species that the site was designated for instance, would be lamprey. We have brook, river and sea lamprey that come in here. Salmon, of course, an important species, and that's one of the species for which the site was designated, and otter as well.
And how do we find the otters?
Yeah, well, you won't always obviously see the animal because they're fairly secretive and very often they're nocturnal. But normally what we do when we're surveying is that we look for the signs of the otters, which are their droppings primarily, and these are known as sprains. Okay, here we are. This is the dead shell of a freshwater pearl mussel, and it's typical of what you'd find in this section of the river here.
It's very big, isn't it?
Well, that particular one now is an adult, and it's probably in the region of 100 years old. So that was probably here as a baby in 1916, about 100 years ago.
That's amazing
And,
that they lived to be that long.
Absolutely, yeah. They're a prime indicator species of water quality, and unfortunately what we're finding in this part of the river is a lot of these adult dead shells washed up.
And why is there a problem? Why is the water quality not good enough?
Whereas in the case of salmon, you have a Q rating from 1 to 5, and generally speaking, the water quality here would be around Q4, which is sufficient for salmonids like trout and salmon to survive. But unfortunately, this little guy here needs a higher level of water quality in order for it to survive. If you look at that stone in front of you, you can see there are two pretty fresh otter sprains here. Even though it's raining today now, I would imagine that they were probably produced sometime last night. They're easily identifiable because the fish bones are very obvious in them from the fish that they've been eating. And one of the main diagnostic features of the otter sprain is the smell, and it's not an unpleasant smell. It's a sort of a musty smell from it. It's a sweet, musty smell.
It doesn't smell. It smells really strong.
It's strong, but it's not unpleasant.
No,
yeah.
No. Because we've got these here, we know that the otters are here.
Exactly. So we record the location here now because the otter is a good indicator species. It's the top of its food chain. That's a good sign of the health of the ecosystem here in the river.
A river catchment is the whole land area that drains into a river and its tributaries. The character of the river and the quality of the water is determined by the rocks, the habitats, and the human activities throughout the whole catchment. So bogs and forests, farms and factories, whether next to a river or miles away, all contribute to water quality. I'm meeting Donald Daly from the EPA, who have new responsibilities in monitoring and managing river catchments.
What are the different land activities that affect the water quality in a catchment?
Well, the main land activity that affects water quality would be farming. And I suppose forestry to a limited degree in the catchment, particularly in the upper areas. Usually when the trees are being planted or being cut, that can cause a problem to the water. And then also effluent from wastewater treatment plants from villages and towns.
Are we doing enough to improve water quality?
I think it's only fair to say that we're doing a lot. There's been a lot of expenditure on urban wastewater treatment plants. The farmers themselves have spent a lot on, for instance, slurry storage. And they're doing a lot themselves. But we do need to do more, particularly in the context that we may be increasing farm output.
And what can farmers do to reduce the impacts on river water quality?
So the farmers, I would be saying, really look very closely at their own farmyards. Make sure there's no leakage of phosphorus and nitrogen from it. Phosphorus is the biggest cause of water pollution in Ireland. It's the greatest cause. And it takes very little to cause a problem. If you take 1 kilogram of phosphorus, in other words, like a bag of sugar, if that escapes off the land and leaks into water, it will pollute 6.4 million gallons of water. So the point is, it takes very, very little. And similarly, if you take activities up on the hills there, if anything enters the groundwater, it'll flow slowly to the ground and come up in the river, and impact on the river, and then that in turn can impact the whole way down to Youghal.
So I've been travelling up the Blackwater River and I've discovered that we used to have this huge abundance of salmon in the river. And we don't anymore. We're at a low point compared to what we used to have years and years ago. Do you think that we could do enough to actually restore those healthy populations again?
I'm optimistic, but at the same time, I'm apprehensive about the future. I think looking to the next 10, 20 years, there's an enormous challenge ahead of us. There is a greater understanding of the need for everybody to work together. And it's not just the public bodies, it's also working with the local communities, working in partnership with local communities. We have a good scientific understanding of the issues now, better than ever before, of what's causing the problem, where it's arising, and what we can do about it. So we can target what we do.
I really like this concept, where everyone in the community works together to improve water quality in the catchment.
I'm on my way to visit a community who are doing just that.
As part of the Duhallow Life project, communities along the Blackwater River catchment have worked together over the past few years to improve water quality and make the river more hospitable to salmon and other wildlife.
Fran, what is the Duhallow Life project?
Duhallow's a very big area. And so we have a company which is made up of the community to help improve the area here from the point of view of wildlife and from the point of view of people living here. Well, specifically, the River Blackwater is a very important salmon river. A salmon and sea trout is worth over 210 million to the Exchequer. It supports over 3,000 people. So the Blackwater River itself is the second most important salmon river in Ireland. But having said that, there's problems with riverbank erosion, with pollution, with invasive species. So these problems are problems which can only be resolved through the community working together. And that's basically what we're trying to do. Most of the stakeholders here will be coming from a farming background or from the agri-food sector. So it's important that whatever we do works in partnership with them. So we try and find solutions that allow people to get on with making a living and also that protects the environment.
Riverbank erosion is a major issue along rivers like the Blackwater. One of the innovations is to minimise cattle contact with the riverbank, with new fencing and faster river crossings.
It's a lot of cattle. What are the stonework here? What's that for?
Along this section and a number of sections further on down, the erosion, riverbank erosion was so severe and it was accelerating that fencing alone wasn't sufficient to try and combat the erosion. We had to actually bring in rock. And the idea is to try and reduce the erosion, give the plants time to recolonise, and then over time it'll revegetate.
And why is that important, Fran? What is it here that you're trying to protect or restore?
Well, we're standing over here is a spawning bed for Atlantic salmon.
So they actually spawn in the gravel here?
Literally here in front of us, yeah.
Wow.
So at the tail end of this pool, the females will dig nests called redds, and they'll deposit the eggs, and the males will fertilise the eggs. But if you have a lot of land erosion, and what will happen is you get a lot of silt coming in, the soil will be washed into the river, and that soil then will block the gaps between the gravels where the eggs will sit.
So if these banks are being eroded, whether it's by cattle or by floodwaters, that won't allow the salmon to spawn here?
It won't allow the eggs to survive, see? So what we did was we brought in the rock and then we reprofiled the banks, redesigned them, and then we planted the trees. So those willows you see there. So the idea is to try and get the natural vegetation back. That's good from the point of view of dealing with the erosion, but also creates habitat for other species like otters and other wildlife. So the whole idea here is to try and work with nature so we can develop the local economy, local tourism and recreation. Why shouldn't the kids come down here and go for a swim in the summer and enjoy the river like their grandparents did?
We know that one of the biggest causes of river pollution across the country is from agriculture. As part of this project, the angling community organised beginners fishing classes for farmers with land bordering the river. In this way, the farmers get a different perspective on the river and its ecology.
You've been out teaching local farmers how to fish on this river. Why have you been doing that?
That is correct. Well, the Angling Centre, since it was founded in 2012, has been working in close contact with the LIFE project. And the farmers here have been very, very cooperative with the LIFE project. And one day in the discussion about fishing with some of the farmers, we discovered that most of them, even though they were living in the bank of the river for most of their natural lives, had never fished.
And do you think the farmers that have been out fishing, do they see the river differently?
I think they do. I think that is a big part of it as well. They can appreciate now the importance of water quality and the importance of conservation of the fish, you know. And maybe at one time it was just a stream flowing through the land or a river flowing through the land. Now they're using it as a hobby and they can see the importance of having good water quality in the area, you know.
Before, where farmers would have seen this river maybe as more of an obstacle, they have a different view and a different understanding of the river. And I suppose that gives a bit more incentive to then work with the river and make small changes to make sure that the farming and the fishing can coexist.
What's being done here in Duhallow is pretty revolutionary. It's community action like this that shows the way forward for collaborative catchment management. Imagine if this was happening right across the country. To help make this happen, the EPA has divided the whole country into 500 smaller sub-catchments, which will allow communities to take ownership of their local waterways, emulating what's been done here in Duhallow. I've seen some really great work being carried out to tackle pollution and habitat degradation around the Blackwater catchment, but there are still huge challenges to tackle. For example, Youghal, a town of almost 10,000 people, still discharges untreated wastewater directly into the Blackwater estuary. Paying for much-needed sewage treatment plants and prioritising which ones get done first is a challenge for all of us. Here I'm meeting Dr. Jenny Deacon and Dr. Robert Wilkes of the Environmental Protection Agency, who are looking at water quality in the estuary in a pretty unusual way.
Jenny, you're monitoring catchments then like this all over the country?
That's right. We rely very heavily on our monitoring evidence, and being here at the end of the Blackwater catchment is a really good indicator of what's going on across the whole catchment.
You need to just strap on that. Jenny, you can go.
Jenny and Robert measure and monitor water quality to find out how all the different activities throughout the catchment are affecting the estuary.
Sampling is fairly straightforward. I take my trusty quadrat and I throw it out, and then I take a picture. So that takes a recording of the species and the cover within the quadrat.
Okay, let me give you a hand here scraping this up.
And when we go to weigh this, we'll filter out all the sand and the rocks so that we're only measuring the biomass of the seaweed itself.
I find it amazing that the volume of the seaweed is actually going to tell us about the nutrient status of the whole catchment.
So all of the nutrients coming down the catchment end up down here and pass over the mudflats. And the seaweeds are there growing and taking up whatever nutrients are available to them. So as the nutrients decrease, the seaweeds will decrease.
And we have seen a lot of improvement, but there's still more to do. And we need to look at all the different activities like septic tanks, wastewater treatment plants, agricultural activities, all the sources of the nutrients, and figure out which ones do we need to fix in order to get a better improvement downstream.
So all of those activities are effectively fertilising the river and fertilising these mudflats
That's
in
exactly it.
in an unnatural way.
Yeah, yeah. Over-fertilised.
So we get these back to the lab and go and take another sample.
Great.
With more than 5,000 lakes, 7,000 kilometres of coastline, and a network of rivers and streams crisscrossing the country, Ireland has a unique and precious water resource. It's our heritage, and it's essential to our industry, agriculture, economy, tourism, and health. But it's also very vulnerable. So many of our activities affect water quality. On my journey through the Blackwater catchment, I've seen so many solutions to the challenges our rivers are facing. And the key to successful catchment management is when communities get involved.
Irish folklore tells us that we have the legend of the wisdom of the salmon of knowledge. But there's not many salmon left, and it seems that wisdom is in short supply too. But there are pockets where people are making a real difference, and it's benefiting the community, both financially and environmentally. We have so much to gain by learning from these communities. Farmers, industry, and local authorities all need to work together to make sure that all our rivers can flourish again. And if we can do that, we'll all benefit.